Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. So, who's responsible for all the violence, chaos, and destruction in America today? Well, Joe Biden thinks he knows, and the answer would be Donald Trump. Yes, that's right. This is a very convoluted explanation, but part of it is the division that Trump has been sowing low these last 3.5 years. But also, and this is a little more complicated, Trump talking about enforcing the law is actually directly inciting this. From the Wall Street Journal, launching his fall campaign, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden accused President Trump of failing to guard American safety amid the coronavirus pandemic and racial turmoil in Wisconsin and Oregon following police shootings and killings of Black people. Yes, racial turmoil. That's an interesting way to drive reparations for poor people, BIPOC people, marginalized people. Biden delivered his first address Monday since formally accepting his party's nomination during a virtual convention, responding to the president's law and order message after a weekend in which a man was fatally shot in Portland amid a clash between protesters and Trump supporters. Blah, blah, blah. George Floyd, now sainted. The simple truth is Donald Trump failed to protect America, so now he's trying to scare America, Biden said, adding that the president had fomented violence. Trying to scare America. Oh, that we're all going to die of COVID-19? That people going to restaurants or pubs or literally murderers? That kind of scaring? Biden continued, Donald Trump has been a toxic presence in our nation for 4 years, poisoning how we talk to one another. And we rid ourselves of this toxin, or we will make it a permanent part of the nation's character. I don't really like where he's going with this, because the very clear suggestion is vote for me or America gets it. Or as the Babylon Bee put it, nation's mayors determined to let their cities burn to the ground in order to own Trump. Speaking at the White House Monday, Trump described the former vice president's remarks in Pittsburgh. Was it Pittsburgh? I'll get to that in a moment. As strange, saying he didn't mention the far left, or from what I saw, he didn't mention the word Antifa. And the Wall Street Journal, which is popularly referred to as a right-wing newspaper, Antifa refers to a loose affiliation of far-left groups and individuals who say they believe in confronting those they consider racist, anti-Semitic, or fascist. Bet you never saw the day that the Wall Street Journal would be in the tank for Antifa. Did you? Trump continued, he mostly seemed to blame the police and law enforcement. The mob rules. Democracy indeed is dead. The reason we're continuing to see violence in left-wing cities today is that liberal politicians, mayors, prosecutors, and judges are refusing to enforce the law and put the rioters in jail. Asked Monday by reporters about the teenager Kyle Rittenhouse, Trump replied he was trying to get away from them, I guess it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have. Twitter is actively convening to ensure the election of Joe Biden and Democratic candidates for the House and the Senate. No. That would be a deeply irresponsible statement to make, and I certainly won't do so. Asked if private citizens should be intervening like that, Trump said, I'd like to see law enforcement take care of everything. Trump said he reached out to the Blake family's pastor. They wanted me to speak, but they wanted to have lawyers involved, and I thought that was inappropriate, so I didn't do that. In Pittsburgh, was it Pittsburgh? Biden condemned acts of violence and property destruction amid the demonstrations. Rioting is not protesting, looting is not protesting, setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and Simple. Biden said in his remarks that the president is using the protests, which are broadly calling for racial justice and changes to policing. Oh, that's what they're doing, to try to shift focus away from the coronavirus pandemic, in which confirmed cases have surpassed 6 million in the US and more than 183,000 people have died. Well, as we've learned in the last few days, only 6% of those who have died did not also suffer from serious comorbidities. He also sought to connect with Pennsylvania energy workers, that's Biden, who have helped to make the state the nation's second largest producer of natural gas. I am not banning fracking. Let me say that again. I'm not banning fracking, no matter how many times Donald Trump lies about me. Well, that's certainly not what the people heckling him when he was in Pennsylvania seemed to think. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, Biden comes to PA and asks, does anyone believe there will be less violence if Trump wins? Responding to escalating clashes that loom over the presidential race. Yeah, again, that's an interesting way of describing a complete collapse of civic order. Biden said Trump would only make the country more volatile and dangerous in a second term. This president long ago forfeited any moral leadership in this country. He can't stop the violence because for years he's fomented it. He may believe that mouthing the words law and order makes him strong, but his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is. Does anyone believe there will be less violence in America if Donald Trump is elected? Once again, vote for me and the Democrats, or America gets it. Now, I'm looking at a picture here of Joe Biden's so-called campaign appearance, where was it? It was somewhere near Pittsburgh. The Biden campaign has been economical with the actuality in terms of where Joe is going to be on any day, or if he's going to be anywhere. And I'm looking at a picture of the setup here. Joe is standing at a podium. There are three or four American flags behind him, and there is an enormous American flag farther back. There's a bunch of reporters and laptops sitting in safety circles and a cameraman. And of course, you've got a very tight close-up on Joe Biden. And that's necessary because otherwise the people of America would have seen that Joe Biden was campaigning to an empty room. Now, how can a man be elected president when he is literally terrified of being around people? Literally terrified of being around people who will not campaign in the traditional sense. He does photo ops. Photo opportunities, that's what he does. Steve Saylor wrote yesterday, Biden, you got a nice country here, Americans. It would be a shame if something happened to it. As others have said, Biden comes across here like a gangster working a protection racket on a speakeasy. After all, the vast majority of politics influenced violence in the US since Memorial Day has been committed by people who are anti-Trump. Because Biden is the official or nominal leader of anti-Trump forces, he's threatening 4 more years of pillage, arson, and funeral shoot-ups in case he loses the election under the Constitution is pretty bad. On the other hand, Biden could take steps in September to reassure law-abiding voters that he would use the presidency to uphold law and order. It's not at all hard to believe that deep down Joe prefers law and order to what is going on now. For example, right now, he might use his person-to-person political skills to get the mayor of Portland to shut down the anarchy. That would be a positive step toward convincing, dragging themselves to the recognition that Trump might actually be real. The powerful fragmentation grenade detonated at the Republican convention provoked Trump haters, alerted that as the polls were moving unfavorably, it might be wise for Democratic candidate to criticize mob violence, something he and his pint Stelter, who will enter the Guinness Book of World Records for the frequency of his utterance in reference to President Trump in the last 3 years, quote, the walls are closing in, righteously wagging his glabrous head at the viewers as he told them that the urban guerrilla violence sweeping the country really was a peaceful protest. The same assurance was given by correspondents of CNN and the other anti-Trump networks reporting from riot-torn cities, even as largely minority-owned businesses torched by the peaceful protesters belched flame and smoke behind them. Having studiously pretended throughout the summer as unusually violent rioting erupting in city after city, ultimately injuring 700 policemen, killing over 30 people, and inflicting over $1 billion in damage, I would think that that is much more than $1 billion in damage, many, many billions. That it was just a continuing vigorous protest over the death of George Floyd. The official and media Democrats have been rudely awakened by their own allies and proteges. Rather than serve the convenience of the Democratic Party, which for the purposes of the anti-white racists and other extremists who lead the riots is just a vast assemblage of useful idiots whose naivete and cowardice they can exploit to assault American society, Black Lives Matter and Antifa wish to expose the weakness and moral bankruptcy of those who appease them as much as they wish to assault Trump's America. As distinguished guests at the White House nomination acceptance speech made their way back to their hotels last Thursday night, many, including Senator Rand Paul and his wife, were heckled, pushed, threatened, and only quick police work avoided serious harm. As this was being transmitted to the television viewers of the country, the transitory Democratic bromide that this is Trump's America was being circulated. This commendable improvisation holds that Trump's authoritarianism, which Senator Bernie Sanders and others had warned the nation about at their convention, created the matrix and the breeding grounds for violence, and that Trump himself, the madman in the White House, was responsible for unleashing arson, vandalism, and assault from Rodeo Drive and Michigan Avenue to Madison Avenue. Well, if Trump is guilty of this toxicity, whatever that might mean, and that the rioting is actually peaceful protests, which are entirely necessary for America to be transformed, for the original sin of white supremacy to be effaced, not that it's possible for it to be effaced, then the Democrats have put themselves in a position of supporting the rioters. At a more worldly but just as scurrilous level, Andrew Sullivan, one of the most militant and inflexible Trump haters, now professes to believe that the total collapse of American society is at hand. According to Sullivan, Trump's goal is the creation of chaos in which he can assert a thuggish semi-dictatorship. It is, he writes, and apparently believes, a Weimar, a reference to the government of Germany between its defeat in World War I in 1918 and the rise of Adolf Hitler in 1933. This is an implicit comparison of Trump, who has been the victim, not the perpetrator, of unconstitutional illegalities, with Hitler, who, because of the particular opprobrium of genocide, probably ranks as the most monstrous criminal in human history, though he is not without rivals. It is to this depth of unfathomable fatuity that even relatively highbrow Trump haters have descended. Sullivan knows perfectly well that there is no comparison whatsoever to be made between the United States and defeat-born Weimar Germany, trying to stumble in democracy humiliated with 7 million dead and wounded, and the complete collapse of the economic system. Sullivan concedes that there is a possibility of staving off the collapse of democracy and society in general, but is pessimistic because that possibility resides in the weak and compromised hands of Joe Biden. Weimar Germany, huh? This is Weimarica, which was popularized by Ryan Landry, whose book on masculinity I praised a few weeks ago. Does the left or the Trump haters, do they really want to bring up Weimar Germany? I suppose these are the people who watch Bob Fosse's Cabaret and are continually surprised that it does not have a happy ending. We have a wholesale celebration of decadence in America, in the West generally. And where's the opposition to this? Where is it? Yes, the Nazis had their bully boys on the streets, but so did the communists, and all of the political parties in Weimar Germany had private armies. It's a very one-sided war that is being fought on America's streets, and a little bit more about that later. Let's look at President Trump's Twitter feed Nigel Farage, President Trump's base is still very highly motivated. I think he will win in November, but the early mail-in voting is potentially a dark cloud on the horizon. Yes. And I suppose that Joe Biden could have a stroke, a real stroke, and he could be rendered gaga, or he could just be rendered gaga even without a stroke. And you will find that already, hundreds of thousands of millions of people have voted for Joe Biden. This is it's outrageous. It should not be permitted. You vote on election day, unless you have a very good excuse, and wanting to get your vote in early and often is not a good excuse. Dems set to reject election day results, Kassam explains. This is from the National Pulse, a video, but I have a similar story on this, which I will talk about in a few minutes. And, Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times tweeted August the 30th, actually, a study found that 2/3 of the attacks in 2019 and 90% in the first 5 months of this year were committed by right-wing extremists. There is a problem with leftist violence, but rightist violence is far more common. I learned from Steve Saylor that Nick Kristof has been literally on a mountaintop for some time. Of course, these riots started months ago, but you see, it's all a question of how it's defined. As Thomas Zaz once said, in the animal world, the rule is kill or be eaten, but in the human world, the rule is define or be defined. And what we are seeing, the complete breakdown of civic order in the United States, is not violence. It's certainly not leftist violence. It is mostly peaceful protests. That's what it is. And we know that to be so because the media keeps telling us. We're seeing a lot of a video clip from, I think it was June, in which Kamala Harris, this was before she was chosen by Joe Biden as his Veep pick, appeared on Stephen Colbert's show. And Kamala tells us that she marched in her first protest when she was 6 years old or something. I suppose metaphorically, she was marching in the womb. But she just can't stop giggling and being sassy and get this big smile on her face as she keeps saying, beware. She used that word, beware. The protests are never going to stop. They are not going to stop before the election. They are not going to stop after the election. And Stephen Colbert, he looks rather bemused, not impressed, perhaps a little frightened, or simply put out that Kamala is pushing a line which is not good for the Democrats. Oh, yes, law and order for me, but not for thee. Dan McCarthy of KATU tweets, a riot was declared overnight in Northwest Portland. Hundreds of protesters celebrated the mayor's birthday while wearing party hats, launching fireworks, and marching with a large sign that read, resign. And the follow-up story, Portland police say 19 people were arrested after declaring a riot near Portland Mayor's Ted Wheeler's condo in Northwest Portland overnight. And then we see the graffiti, ACAB, which stands for All Cops Are Bastards. Cops and Klan go hand in hand. And Ted the Weasel, the mayor of Seattle, seemed to be perfectly happy with the peaceful protests before that, let's say that left-wing city councilor from India decided to lead the protesters to the mayor's house, and it got shut down in a hurry. And we see that Lori Lightfoot, the terrifying mayor of Chicago, has justified the large police presence around her house at all times because they are leaders. They are not peons like you. From Bakersfield.com, actually originally from the Mercury News, which is in San Jose, if I'm not mistaken. Recent protests sparked by police killings of Black people across the country have escalated to the level that has put big city mayors in the crosshairs of protesters. In crosshairs, that is a very violent metaphor there. These are peaceful protests. Oh, if they're just burning down buildings and, trying to burn policemen alive and the like, and beating the hell of or shooting anyone who gets in their way, then they're peaceful protests. If you disturb the politicians, then these people, are being put in crosshairs. They don't think that they're doing enough to forge change, and others, including President Donald Trump, who say they should be cracking down on the unrest. And for some of them, the strife has hit close to home in the form of vandalism. So sad, so very, very sad. San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, who has largely defended the city's police department and advocated against the defunding police movement in recent months, became the latest target of protesters last weekend when about 100 of them marched to his home, sparked by the recent Wisconsin police shooting of Black resident Jacob Blake. Well, obviously, Sam Liccardo has absolutely nothing to do about, police procedures in Kenosha or in Minneapolis or in any city other than his own. While there, some protesters spray-painted message including F*** 12, referring to police, and San Jose will be free soon, threw eggs at it and burned an American flag and a Blue Lives Matter flag taken to the scene. Later that evening, police reported a second incident of vandalism at San Jose City Hall, where one suspect was arrested, booked, and jailed on a felony charge. Having someone graffiti my house is just part of the job, Liccardo said Monday, after his neighbors had cleaned off any remnants of the graffiti from his home. I understand that's the nature of leadership in difficult times, but what is greater concern to me is a pattern of violent and criminal behavior designed to lure police. The vandalism to Liccardo's home occurred 1 month after the home of Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf was also splattered with graffiti messages such as defund OPD and cancel rent. According to San Jose Police Department Sergeant Christian Camarillo, all indications were that this was supposed to be a peaceful protest, just like the second week of George Floyd protests. So there really wasn't a need for us to be out there. Yeah, that's what they call being proactive. We 110% support people who want to organize and conduct peaceful protests, but when a crime occurs and blatant acts of vandalism occur, we are going to respond. That is, if we bother to show up. U.S. Representative Ro Khanna said the recent acts of vandalism against San Francisco Bay Area city leaders was appalling and outrageous. I understand that there are a lot of people who are frustrated with the system and who don't see it changing, but the answer to that is to take inspiration from Dr. King and John Lewis and to take the higher ground. Yes, it's one thing when your city gets burned down, but it is quite another when you are inconvenienced if you are a leader. Trump, despite being warned off by the governor of Wisconsin, visited Kenosha today. Before he went, he said that his focus on law and order would heal racial divisions. This is according to the New York Post. I think it is helping because I'm about law and order. And if you look at the Black community, they want the police to help them stop crime. The Hispanic community, they want police, 82%, 84% numbers if you haven't even seen. They don't want crime. They don't want to be mugged. They don't want to have any problems. One of the big reasons I'm making the trip today and going to Wisconsin is that we've had such a big success. Kenosha would have been burned to the ground by now, and we're really going to say hello to law enforcement and the National Guard. And it all stopped immediately upon the National Guard's arrival. According to The Hill, Trump sidesteps Blake's shooting to extol law enforcement in Kenosha. course, the more we are finding out about Jacob Blake, the less sympathetic a martyr figure he has become. But that's always the way, isn't it? Let's see. President Trump on Tuesday toured property damage and lauded law enforcement in Kenosha, while largely sidestepping the police shooting of Jacob Blake there that set off days of demonstrations and renewed calls for systemic reform. Yeah, this goes beyond Orwellian to simply Stalinist. Yes, burning down downtown Kenosha. That's demonstrations and renewed calls for systemic reform. This is from Brett Samuels and Morgan Chalfant of The Hill. The president surveyed the remains of B&L Office Furniture, a furniture store that was severely damaged during riots in Kenosha last week. What do you mean riots? I thought this was demonstrations and renewed calls for systemic reform. He spoke to its owners during the later roundtable. Trump pledged to devote federal resources to help businesses and law enforcement in the city, and he later announced tens of millions of grants to Kenosha. Some people thought it would be a good thing for me to come, a bad thing. I just wanted to come. I really came today to thank law enforcement, Trump said. You keep getting back to the opposite subject. We should talk about the kind of violence we've seen in Portland and here and in other places, Trump said when asked about systemic racism. Asked for his message to Blake's family, Trump demurred, noting the ongoing investigation into the matter, which he called a complicated subject. The Justice Department and Wisconsin officials are currently investigating the shooting, which occurred August 23rd. Trump invited Pastor James Ward of Insight Church, the pastor for Blake's mother, Julia Jackson, to participate in the roundtable. When a reporter posed a question about bias within law enforcement toward Trump jumped in to defend the vast majority of police as good actors. Yes, the New York Post has a slightly more realistic depiction of what happened in Kenosha. President Trump toured riot-ravaged Kenosha, Wisconsin Tuesday, days after the city was first racked by the police-involved shooting of Jacob Blake, and then by a resulting wave of fiery unrest that included a teen vigilante allegedly gunning down two protesters. Black people are roughed up by the police in America all the time. Sometimes they're shot by the police. Sometimes they're choked, which leads to death. But what we're seeing in America now is quite interesting, because each incident, including incidents that never happened, such as someone who had committed suicide, supposedly being shot by the police, leads to an orgy of looting. And I'm wondering whether these people who are being shot by the police or being, roughed up by the police, are they thinking about this, that they are making perhaps the ultimate sacrifice so that so many others can get free stuff, can get gibs, claim their 5-finger discount of reparations? I wouldn't be surprised. Julia Kelly writes in American Greatness. Now before I go into that, let's go to the chat. I hope it's a little more refined than it was yesterday. Getting a little out of hand. Visionary Companion says, greetings from the city of bloviating Swartz, otherwise known as Seattle. Jonathan Pohl says, hi. Hello, Professor Pohl. How is your job search going? Chad Chadson says Seattle is nice this time of year. Indeed, it is. And again, I spent a lot of time in Seattle in my life, and it was a pretty sleepy port city. It was associated with Boeing, the forestry industry, fishing industry. It was a working class town, really. And then Microsoft moved in, and Amazon moved in, and now it is a bugman hive. And I've been following what's been going on near Seattle's waterfront for several years now, and it is not a pleasant place to be because it is filled with crazy, violent people who the police don't really have much interest in restraining. I am marginalized, says Jonathan Pohl. Sorry to hear that. Chogokin666 says, I am TRIPOC. Fear me. Again, from Professor Pohl, Antifa is a centralized Stalinist terror organization funded by large corporations. Thank you for your kind comment. Tom Anderson, Metal Mike says, what purpose would large corporations have for funding Antifa? Well, they're woke. They're really, really woke. Also, they don't like small business. And what do these riots do? They're putting so many small businesses out of business. And this real estate is going to be available very cheap after governments pay to clean it up. And so the big business can move in. And they would, big business, woke capital would support Antifa because it's part of the agreement, the coalition between big business and big government. That we support you in your ongoing revolution, and on the other hand, you look the other way as we violate antitrust laws and don't pay taxes like Amazon, or simply break the law repeatedly, and we get our hands slapped by the Department of Justice or the SEC. Justin Proto, is it possible for class action lawsuit against MSN for fulminating and lying about the riots? I don't think so. I don't think so. Visionary Companion, reality Trump satire. See the Anderson Cooper interview with the Brussels sprouts analogist. I just, when these black men come to a bad end and it's revealed how tumultuous their personal lives were from a very early age, one would think that mom and dad, or stepmom and stepdad, as the case may be, would be a little bit shy about, appearing on camera and, this was my sonny boy. Yeah, he didn't really add much to the sum of human happiness, did he? Thermidor, says Chogokin666. Not yet. I think we're getting close. Heck McNeck says, I shared the 6% numbers that the CDC released and was promptly put on notice by Facebook. Do not step out of line again. People have had been suspended from Twitter and had tweets removed talking about this 94-6. There should have been a class action lawsuit against the media ghouls who showed 7 seconds of a much longer Rodney King video, says Visionary Companion. I'm tired of hearing the word comorbidities. There's a lot of words I'm tired of hearing. Epidemiologist is one of them. White supremacy is another one. Black bodies. Oh, and my favorite, racialized. You see, they didn't have races until we pinned labels on them. Nobody had noticed, say, that people from the Congo or people from Sweden looked very different. No one had noticed that until white people decided to racialize others. Justin Proto, today on NPR, they continually talked about St. Kyle, how he shot those commies and was a Trump supporter, but completely neglected to mention one of them had a gun in his face. Yes, and he'd been, kicked to the head? He was clearly about to be, stomped, quite possibly murdered. But I guess he deserved it. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. Now, when various people get limited, especially black people get limited by the police on America's streets, the suggestion he shouldn't have been there in the first place, shouldn't have tried to pass a counterfeit $20 bill while insanely high. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. How dare you? How dare you? Another action item is to start a campaign to completely defund PBS NPR, which is a window into the world of the mandated delusion. And Metal Mike responds, Republicans have been promising to defund PBS for many decades. A decade ago or so, I would have been, opposed to this, but their nihilism is unacceptable now, and their gleeful attempts to foment, which is the word of the day, violence and destruction in America's cities. No, they shouldn't be getting any money anymore. They had their chance many times and did nothing, just like conservatives in Canada and their continued funding of the CBC, which craps on them regardless. A colleague listens to classical music, but it's an NPR affiliate. At 3 p.m., the propaganda comes on. It's delusional. I used to listen to CBC FM for that same reason, and I found that the propaganda became unbearable. That they used to have these arts minutes or arts inserts, and I noticed there were themes. There were stories that the CBC really wanted to highlight. Anything to do with homosexuality and or AIDS. Anything to do with Native Indians or Inuit indigenous people, and anything to do with ballet. And one day they hit the trifecta. A Native Indian with AIDS had written a ballet called Something Silly. I am not making this up. We have a private radio station in Toronto that plays classical, thankfully, says Metal Mike. Well, yeah, it's not that hard to get a hold of private stations that play classical music. Although you're not going to get, it's been pretty dumbed down. You get movements instead of whole symphonies. A real, let's play Baroque music, because apparently no one is going to find that offensive. You're not going to find vocal or choral music on these commercial stations as well. What is it? The Classic FM, the British company, they have come up with the model that everyone imitates. It's your favorite 100 classics. Essentially, the same things played over and over again. William Hicks says, so Biden as president will be a cross between Max Headroom and Professor John Gill. I understand the Max Headroom reference. I don't know who Professor John Gill is. Perhaps someone can explain it to me. Chogokin 666 is Stelter the guy who looks like a middle-aged baby. Yes. Yes, he is. Jim Bowden says, KMG, you are my favorite YouTuber streaming from a funeral parlor. Keep up the good work. Well, you notice my head is closer to the top of the frame here. So the flowers are perhaps not as overwhelming as they were yesterday. Yo, mama. Of course. Heck McNeck searching for Kyle Rittenhouse on my Facebook app returns 0 results of any kind. Dennis Dale says they laid siege to Mayor. And Dennis Dale, all these Colbert are suddenly realizing they're never going to have to stop eating shit and fighting apologetics for barbarity. He really, after reading Kindle, diving into the thank recommendation. Well, my pleasure, Jesse James, sneering smile, racism personified. It's a job. But with Joe, being likely to shuffle off this moral coil at any hour and not willing to do, well, I didn't have a phone until 2 years ago. I never had a cell phone. But important demand from Twitter and PayPal forced me a phone. Philip Daniels says the Umayyad Caliphate had a racial caste system. Non-Arab Muslims were considered racially inferior, while Arabs and Slavs were viewed in terms better left unsaid. Max Brook most of the time. I'm Hicks. Your head. So how many times does Trek Nazi world? Is the 60s and 70s TV was like that. It was like Mission Impossible. Like every third week, there was to stop taking over again. This guy, Bruce Geller, he was the creator of and the showrunner of Mission Impossible and Mix episode, where he personally stopped a fascist takeover in that time. Julie Kelly. back to her. Conservatives have incited political violence. These turncoats are as much to blame for the current climate as the news media, the Democratic Party. Judith is all Donald Trump. Trump supports murder. The Never Trumpers cannot hide the detestation of the American people. Democrats will not cower in fear that Trump blamed them for the violence he provoked. Did he kill George Floyd? Did he kill Breonna Taylor? Did he paralyze Jacob Blake? This is from Jennifer Rubin, the Washington Post conservative method. What, by hobnobbing with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian and announcing measures to get out of prison earlier, etc., etc., etc. There's been an awful lot of this from Trump. But of course, what he actually does makes no difference. It's just him. He's force beyond nature. In fact, Jennifer Rubin herself has called for the harassment of Trump associates, including rank-and-file Republicans and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the first mother to serve as White House press secretary. After Sanders and her young family were thrown out of a Virginia restaurant in 2018, Rubin said that resistance wasn't enough. Quote, "What is most successful is getting 1 million people to protest. No one is telling them to be violent protesters, but we're not going to let these people go life scathed. Sarah Huckabee has no right to live a life of no fuss, no muss, after going to the press, after inciting against the press. These people should be made uncomfortable, and I think that is a life sentence," unquote. Well, I've spoken on this stream considerable light about Georges Sorel and his view that the disappearance from politics meant endless corruption. What Jennifer Rubin and other midwits don't understand is violence is a tool that can be used by anyone. That is to say, they may be getting hot and bothered about what's going on in American streets, but you see the reaction to Kyle Rittenhouse. We're supposed to be the people who are shooting people to death. It's not supposed to be them. They're supposed to just, lay back and take it. Rubin's call to arms came almost 1 year to a day after a leftist lunatic tried to slaughter several Republican congressmen, severely injuring one, Steve Scalise of Louisiana. Never Trump fully endorsed the political prosecution of Donald Trump, first by Barack Obama's FBI, then by special counsel Robert Mueller. The investigations ensnared innocent people whose lives were nearly ruined simply because they backed Donald, rather than stand on conservative principles for a blind system of justice and against the use of federal power to destroy political opponents. Never Trump cheered. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, I'll have more to say about him later. Campaign volunteer Carter Page argues are enemies of the state who deserve their fate, despite solid proof both men were targeted and framed by Obama's henchmen. Never Trump shamefully fanned the flames of racial hatred. Without evidence, Never Trump insists that the president is a racist ipso facto, so is anyone who backs him. They refuse to back off the very fine people trope that intentionally misrepresents what the president said after the August 2017 protests in Charlottesville to make it sound like he complimented alt-right bigots. The president is embracing open white nationalist. Charlie Sykes, editor of The Bulwark, declared, "How much lower can we go?" Well, I suppose, Charlie Sykes, I remember interviewing him back, in the 80s. He was a talk show host forever. It was very amusing to get hold of some of the tapes of his appearances on Milwaukee radio, or even to leaf through some of the books that he read. The president is responsible for a non-existent surge of white nationalist terrorism, David French tried to explain in 2019 before his swearing in as the junior senator from Utah. Rootless cosmopolitan Mitt Romney, that's my characterization, not promised he would keep tabs on Trump's character shortfall or speak out against significant statements or actions that are divisive, racist, sexist, or anti-immigrant. Romney marched with Black Lives Matter activists in June. The Lincoln Project's Rick Wilson claimed the overt racial animus of Trump's base is virulent, widespread, readily detectable in surveys. Bill Kristol shamefully condemns Fox News viewers and host Tucker Carlson, his one-time protege, as white nationalists. The Republicans are being identified as the White Nationalist Party. MSNBC contributor Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, claimed in 2018. The Republican Party is currently constituted, needs to be razed to the ground. It needs to be destroyed. Rubin said we have to collectively, in essence, burn down the Republican Party. We have to level them because if there are survivors, this is very militaristic, isn't it? If there are people who weather the storm, they will do this again. That sounds what academics call eliminationist language, does it not? People who back the president, according to dog lover Jonah Goldberg, are members of a cult blindly following the president. Trump considers criticism of his behavior a greater offense than voting against his agenda, and so do his most ardent supporters. This creates a powerful cultural incentive to define norms down or just defenestrate them entirely. And then he talked about Star Wars or Star Trek or Back 5 or something. Goldberg, like so many never-Trumpers, compared the president's style to some of the evilest men in history, including Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro. Trump is not a dictator, but his 2-hour speech, possibly the longest ever delivered by a U.S. president, shared many of the traits associated with demagogues who feed off a cult of personality, unlike, say, George W. Bush, who actually, or so it was claimed, landed a fighter jet on an aircraft carrier when he was president. Nothing demagogic about that. Evangelicals are another frequent target of never-Trumpers. Soon enough, the need to defend Trump will pass, David French preached in 2018. He'll be gone from the American scene. Then you'll stand in the wreckage of your own reputation and ask yourself, was it worth it? The answer will be as clear then as it should be clear now. It's not, and it never was. Not even pro-life teenagers from Kentucky are safe from never-Trump scorn. Yes, and never forget, Ben Shapiro, little Ben Shapiro, and Size E Cup, and all manner, Rich Lowry of National Review, they all decided to stomp on the Covington schoolboys. Yeah, that did not age well, but you see, that's their point. And their point is to, make it clear that they're content with their sinecures. They don't want political power. They wouldn't know what to do with it if they got it, except to, invade more countries, kill more innocent people, blow to pieces, peasants in wedding parties. They seem to love that so very much. If Trump wins in November, that's it for the never-Trumpers. They're done. They're turncoats. They're never getting back into the Republican Party. And I think their usefulness to the Democrats and the media will be over, because clearly they represent no one except themselves. But that was exactly the same thing. It was true of the neoconservatives. Who were the neoconservatives? They never had a political base. Never had a political base. They were a couple of hundred media pundits and holders of think tank sinecures. That's all they were. And American foreign policy was dominated, especially on the Republican side, by these monstrous people from the 1980s. Networking works, people. President Trump on Tuesday warned pro football and basketball players not to follow the lead of the NBA in boycotting games and kneeling for the national anthem in protest of racial inequality, urging them to stand tall for our country and our flag. People are tired of watching the highly political NBA. Basketball ratings are way down, and they won't be coming back. The president wrote on, I hope football and baseball are watching and learning, because the same thing will be happening to them. Stand tall for our country and our flag. Yes, Major League Baseball just had its yearly Jackie Robinson orgy, where all the players were forced to wear Robinson's number 42. In regular play, No one is allowed to wear that jersey on any team. One would think that it was Jackie Robinson who had invented baseball, or Jackie Robinson had made America, made baseball America's national pastime. Now, that would be a man called Babe Ruth. Major League Baseball is absolutely desperate to get black people to watch baseball, to go to baseball games. No, you can't do that anymore, can you? I don't know, to buy the merch. They're not interested. They have basketball and they have football, and increasingly they don't want to play baseball either. By far, most of the blacks in Major League Baseball come from the Caribbean or South America, and apparently they're not black enough for the MLB. They don't really count. Sheriffs in 2 Oregon counties, this is from the New York Post, are refusing to obey Governor Kate Brown's call to send more cops to Portland to help quell ongoing riots, saying doing so would not solve the nightly violence. Sheriffs in neighboring Washington and Clackamas counties made the announcement. Had Governor Brown discussed her plan with my office, I would have told her it's not about changing, I would have told her it's about changing policy, not ending resources, Clackamas County Sheriff Craig Roberts said Monday. Increasing law enforcement resources in Portland will not solve the nightly violence and now murder. Why are there police then? Well, apparently until perfection has been mandated on Earth, then the police, they serve no purpose. That the violence will continue. Well, violence is always going to continue, of course. It is that very relevant compared to what? Washington County Sheriff Pat Garrett said he would provide support for cops in Portland in indirect ways, but would not send his deputies into harm's way. The lack of political support for public safety, the uncertain legal landscape, the current volatility, combined with intense scrutiny on use of force, presents an unacceptable risk if deputies were deployed directly, Garrett said. The police department in the nearby city of Gresham also told the Oregonian, we are in agreement with the other agencies. The cops won't enforce the law anymore. Why? Lots of reasons. I suppose some of them have sympathies with the rioters and the goals. Others don't want to risk violence. We've seen that since Columbine. Secure the perimeter. Don't save people who are being shot to death one by one. You got to secure that perimeter, as they said, in Boston. And of course, there is the legitimate fear that they have that any attempts to enforce the law, particularly against black offenders, will lead to civic and criminal ruin. Now, BLM has annoyed a great many people in America, and apparently support for it has pretty much vanished, or that is to say, there is, it's pretty much equal. How many people support BLM and how many people do not support it? They had like a 25% plus not that long ago. I think BLM may have gone too far this time. Joyce Pearson, who I gather is a journalist in Memphis, tweets, the wall outside Graceland in Memphis, where Elvis fans write their names and tributes to the king, was vandalized overnight. Black Lives Matter, Defund MPD, Abolish ICE, and Breonna Taylor were spray painted all over the wall. And I'm looking at these pictures here, and I can't help but think that, picture's worth 1,000 words. What does one associate when one thinks of Black Lives Matter? Well, one thinks of burning, looting, hatred of white people, malignant narcissism. But perhaps more than anything else, one thinks of ugliness. Because whenever Black Lives Matter and its allies colonize an area, everything becomes hideous. Everything, every square inch becomes covered with graffiti. And this has a destabilizing effect on people. They do not like this. And gone too far. They've gone too far. A lot of Elvis fans in America, an awful lot. Let's get back to the chat here. Okay, a comment about George Soros that I'm not going to repeat. You shouldn't make suggestions like that, even in jest, because this is a YouTube. Let's see. Watch AK Nation series on Breonna Taylor. She was running a trap house, says Calix Rose. Emmett Kelly's Earth says the neocons were beginning to influence foreign policy by derailing détente back in the 1970s, e.g. Jackson Vanik. Yeah, I suppose that's true. That's true enough. I was a supporter of the neocons back in those days. I mean, Union wanted to win a nuclear, spending enormous amounts of money on civil defense because they survive a nuclear war. That was lies. It was all made up. After Reagan was elected, Richard Pearl was put in charge of a review of the CIA's review of Soviet military intentions. And they had all the resources they could use and came back with an astonishing conclusion. You can see this in Adam Curtis's documentary series, The Power of Nightmares, that they found no evidence that the Soviet Union was doing anything that they would need to do in order to fight a nuclear war and win. And this led them to the conclusion that the Soviet Union was doing all these things because the absence of evidence is not the evidence's absence, as a later Secretary of Defense said. Yeah, they actually said that. Visionary Companion says Marshawn Lynch on the cover of Seattle Magazine actually made me do a double take. I was aghast. Why, in particular? Was he making a terrible face or some such thing? Fired Trump aide Mike Flynn loses bid to get his criminal case dismissed, and judge can hold inquiry into Attorney General Bill Barr's bid to drop prosecution, court rules. So there's no case against Mike Flynn because it's been dropped by the federal government. But the judge decided that he was going to personally prosecute Michael Flynn. Yeah, that actually happened. The judge's name is Emmett Sullivan. This is from the Daily Mail, a federal appeals court in Washington declined Monday to order the dismissal of the Flynn prosecution, permitting a judge to scrutinize the Justice Department's request to dismiss its case against Trump's former national security advisor. The decision keeps the matter at least temporarily alive and rebuffs efforts by both Flynn's lawyers and the Justice Department to force the prosecution to be dropped without any further inquiry from the judge, who has for months declined to dismiss it. Yeah, there's no case against him anymore, but no, he's just declined. And now an appeals court has agreed. How about that? This is justice in America. The chief judge of this appeals court is named Srinivasan, Obama employee. Oh, the fabled Merrick Garland, obviously very bitter about not being a member of the Supreme Court himself. Clinton appointee, Bush appointee, Obama appointee, Clinton appointee, Obama appointee. And there were two dissenters, Naomi Rao, Trump appointee, and Karen Henderson, Reagan appointee. You see, look, this is what's happening here. The deep state has decided that we are the law now. We are the law. And that we will not be stopped. It's that simple. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it is the question they're asking. And I don't think that they want to know. I don't think that they want to know. Because there's more than of skullduggery and outright sedition for the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, all to be abolished and replaced with something that is not. case against from the very start. But again, are you going to do about it? Oh, entertainment news. Grant, we see all manner of these stories, and based on a falsehood, really. But from Post, the musician who wrote reggae classic Electric Avenue, that's gay? I don't think so. Sued for copyright infringement for using the song in a Twitter video that bashed Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Songwriter Eddie Grant filed a suit in Manhattan for court Tuesday, claiming he has suffered and will continue to suffer if the video continues to spread across the internet. The clip, which Trump tweeted on August the 12th, appears to be an endorsement of the election campaign. According to the suit, the video contains a visual depiction of a high-speed train bearing the word hence KMG 2020, in stark contrast to a slow-moving handcar bearing the words President, your hair smells, while being powered by an animated likeness of former VP Biden. While out-of-context excerpts of former vice president's speeches and interviews are played over plaintiff's recording, says both Trump and his election campaign politically benefited from the video, according to the suit. The song was written by Grant after news coverage of the 1981 catchy tune. Myself that made the video, that tweeted the video, I don't see how there's any liability. Second, when you hear these stars complaining Trump or some other hate figure is using my song, I will not stand for it. Do they own the rights to their song? That's the first question. And typically the rose is, you have permission. The permission has to be given after a certain, you just have to pay the fee. You just have to pay the fee. If this were not the case, then you'd have a situation where, oh no, radio station, this TV station, whatever, can't play our song. There are rules governing this, and the recording industry decided a long time ago that it was good for their songs to be played because they get paid for them, first of all, both mechanical and publishing rights, load the tracks, which I am told this is what young people are now doing instead of buying discs. Again, from the Mail, escape to the country. Americans are fleeing the nation's big cities in droves during the pandemic and soaring crime funding cuts. I think there's a little license here. During the pandemic amid soaring crime funding cuts. I think there's a little light in there. Their new laws in there. Their new laws. The data have much less densely populated areas. We draw hard for people looking to relocate amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Idaho, Oregon, and South Carolina all moved to south states like Texas, and between March and August, their governors were trying to them. Georgia and Texas. These people scream about, you know, these terrible Republican governors, but somehow they end up in their states. And of course, this has been going on since the 1960s. People who hate the South end up living in the South. 2/3 of all moves booked in New York and New Jersey were for relocations out of those states. The data shows that just under half of those moving from New York went to cities in Florida, Texas, California, and North Carolina. California? You're headed in the wrong direction. In addition to grappling COVID-19, is that what it's been doing? New York City in particular has also struggled with escalating crime and homelessness in recent months. A staggering number of moving trucks have been spotted across the city in recent days as apartment vacancies hit all-time highs. Well, one hears talk that New York City or Manhattan, maybe even Brooklyn and San Francisco are going to become more bohemian. Well, I think that apartment rents would have to fall a lot more than they have for that to happen. This is a more serious story, and Get used to this because you're going to be hearing a lot of it. Again, from the Mail, from their U.S. political reporter, Caitlin Corral, Democratic data firm makes chaos on election night with Donald Trump set for landslide victory, which will taste to be ruled as victory for Joe Biden thanks to postal votes. You see the planted axiom here? This is quite sinister. Oh yeah, overwhelmingly the postal vote is going to be for Joe Biden. How would anyone know that? How could anyone possibly know that unless the fix is already in? The CEO of a Democratic political data agency predicted chaos on election day. John Mendelsohn told Axios in an interview that our Sunday evening that the firm Hawkfish has a theory of a red mirage in November. Yeah, see, the votes come in Tuesday night. Everyone in the media was saying, just ignore this, because it shows Donald Trump winning, and no, he can't win. He can't win because we know there's going to be a tsunami of postal votes that are all going to be for Joe Biden. The brazenness here is shocking. You know, it used to be that absentee ballots is what we for postal voting. The rule of thumb was that the absentee ballots, they were very heavily for the right-wing or candidate because these were the kind of people vacations. They're far more like rich people, better off people. But now, oh no, mail-in votes are all going to be for Biden and the Democratic Party. Well, you know, in these states that postal voting, anyone can take advantage of the postal voting. Yeah. The reason we are talking about a red mirage is that because we believe that on election night we're going to see Donald in a stronger position than the reality actually is. And so in a stronger position than the reality actually is. And so to know the reality is before the votes are counted. That's how they did it in communist countries and other dictatorships. He claimed that the unconventional factors for election day this year in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic are setting the stage for potential chaos. No, that's what they want. Was it Hillary had that Biden should not concede under any circumstances? They intend to lawfare to the end, and if that doesn't work, they intend to burn down America. Even more so than is going on now, they're going to make it really clear that Trump has to concede. Trump has to move out of the White House so he can be arrested if they start making specific violent and against Trump's the media. Selected in lieu of in person. Oh, well, you know, if you turn up in person ID, one can make a reasonable assumption. That you are, and you're eligible to vote. Millions of these ballots are going to be willy-nilly, and we already know that you can have help. You can have help filling them out, which is the sort of where the president delivered to a local Muslim hetman who determines what the ballots say. Spoiler alert: they're all for labor. This is not good. This is not good. And you know, as Trump continues to rise in the polls, and the revulsion against the Democrats' support, implicit or otherwise, for violence continues to rise, you're going to be hearing more and more from the Democrats and their allies that the election is fake. We're not going to lose. We cannot lose because the mail-in ballots, they're going to save us. And, you know, if the mail-in ballots were, say, 60-40 for Biden, oh, well, no, this is obviously wrong because the mail-in ballot should be 70-30 or perhaps even 80-20. Trump has claimed he will accept the results, yet that if universal mail-in voting is implemented, meaning every registered voter is automatically sent a ballot in the mail, the results would not be trustworthy. Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Um, Over the last, decade or so, I've come across numerous, let's say right-wing fantasies about a race war in America. There was a pop one about a decade ago. It was called something like "The Day the EBT Cards Stopped Working." Now all this talk is coming from the left. This is from the Daily Caller. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser said Monday she's worried about America descending into a race war. Bowser, a Democrat, discussed the ongoing unrest in the nation's capital at a Monday press conference where she warned that the rioting in D.C. that took place over the weekend could be domestic terrorism and could be organized and funded. What I'm worried about is this country descending into a race war, Bowser said, and I'm worried about the continued incitement of violence from leadership who should be focused on bringing our communities together. Our police and peaceful protesters will be safer when we come together as a community and tamp down this black versus white rhetoric. The Metropolitan Police Department has arrested 527 individuals for curfew violations, riot-related burglary, and other riot-related events in the nation's capital between May the 30th and Sunday. Most of those arrested are from the DMV area, 44% from DC, 27% from Maryland, 12% from Virginia, and 4% from other states within the U.S. Now, there has been a low-level intensity race war going on in the United States for decades, which I have dubbed the Black Intifada. And, when a white man, where did this happen the other day? You've seen the video. A man says, white lives don't matter. And he runs across the street to hit this old guy across the head with a brick. And of course, he goes down like a sack of potatoes. There are thousands upon thousands of such incidents every year in the United States. And in recent years, of course, we've been told that white people are simply bad. They suffer from a melanin shortage. There's been openly eliminationist language used against white people in the United States. I've been making this joke for some weeks now. What if they gave a race war and only one side came? Now, what Mayor Bowser has to say suggests that perhaps she understands the possibility of a violent backlash. If so, she would be unusual because the assumption is that only one race is going to fight, and the other one is just going to meekly acquiesce to its total eclipse. From the New York Post, a similar story. She said there was a stark contrast, this is Mayor Bowser, when outside militants disrupted peaceful protests. 70% of those arrested in recent days were from outside the district. Oh, they lived a couple of miles away in Maryland, Virginia, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I've been to Metro DC, and a great many people who consider themselves to be Washingtonians don't actually live in Washington. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. They are investigating whether it was domestic terrorism and an organized funded attempt to create violence, DC Police Chief Peter Nugent revealed, while the mayor admitted she feared a more alarming end game. It'd be like talking about Vancouver and saying, that protesters or rioters, they were from North Vancouver or West Vancouver or New Westminster or Richmond or Surrey, as if these people in all those places don't consider themselves to be Vancouverites. And now let's open up some other stories. Kyle Rittenhouse. I think I talked about that already, that Trump defended him. I don't see how he is not going to defend him. But I guess, isn't that funny how just in the past, if it had been any other Republican politician, one would have expected him to be simply condemned, right? because what you want to do, what the Republicans are intent on doing, is demonizing their own supporters, because that's what they're do. Because that's what they do, because they are feckless cowards. There's an essay by Victor Davis Hanson in American Greatness called "Cultural Suicide is Painless." Victor Davis Hanson, he's written some good things in recent months, and his historical work is valuable. But of course, he was a neocon, and I don't know whether neocons can ever be forgiven. He begins in February. New York was the world's most dynamic metropolis. I'm suspicious of blanket statements like that. Was it really the world's most dynamic metropolis? How many other metropoli were considered before that statement was made? In any event, by August, the city was more like the ruins of Ephesus. It is not all that hard to blow up a culture. You can do it in a summer if you haven't much worry of others. When you loot and burn a Target in an hour, it takes months to realize there are no more neighborhood Target stocked groceries, toilet paper, and Advil to buy this winter. You can, in a night, assault the police, spit at them, hope to infect them with the coronavirus, and even burn them alive. But when you call 911 in a few weeks after your car is vandalized, your wallet is stolen, and your spouse is violent, and no one comes, only then do you sense that you earlier were voting for a pre-civilized wilderness. No, no, no. That is not how it works. What, they're going to blame themselves for the results of their actions? I don't think that Victor Davis Hanson has been paying much attention. It's Trump's fault, or it's Target's fault, or it's Wendy's fault, or it's just the fault of white supremacy. That's how it goes. It is never the fault of the people who caused the violence, who reduced neighborhoods to nothing. It's never their fault. When are people held responsible for anything anymore? Subheading here, old liberal ideas are being destroyed. Well, I'd say that liberalism is dead, and that the age of reason is over. We move back into the age of magical thinking and of status justice. He writes, we are living in the most radically polarized climate since the 1960s. America's past, present, and future are in the process of being recalibrated entirely through of one's skin color. Columbus is reduced to nothing more than another racist white Italian sailor of a millennium past. Grant might as well have fought for slavery in the mind of his campus ignoramuses. Apparently, the Antifa thug could have just as easily have written the Gettysburg Address or sculpted a statue of Frederick Douglass. Well, Victor Davis Hanson knows very well that there has been a mockery of the past, a mockery of generally high culture, even middle ground culture for decades now. I mean, WAP is surely greater than any Franz Schubert song. Surely it is. Surely it is. How many records did Franz Schubert ever sell? Goethe? Never heard of it. Yeah, I'm going to mention this here now. I'm going to be talking about Tex Avery on Theater Thursday in a couple of weeks. And so I was watching some Warner Brothers cartoons of the 1930s and 1940s, and it really hit me, that I'd grown up with this. But it hits me hard now that there's a cartoon called Rhapsody Rabbit where Bugs Bunny is playing Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody #2. Now, I know that Liszt lampshaded in this, but the general assumption there that one, the audience for these cartoons were created for adults, not for children. They were shown as extra bits when you went to the movies. People would know who Franz Liszt was, and that they wouldn't be appalled by this music. And there's a famous Bugs Bunny joke, which is one of the greatest gags ever, where is a conductor, and he's dressed as formal wear. In his ears, he pushes back to create this mane in his head. It's like, oh, he's Leopold Stokowski. Just the assumption was that people watching this cartoon, many of them would know who Leopold Stokowski was. And well, the ignorance that presides now. I think it was Manning who said that when Futurama started, I think in 1997, that the executives at Fox kept saying they got rid of Richard Nixon as a character. Well, because no one knows who Richard Nixon was. Actually, I don't know that that's actually true, but it doesn't really matter. In the context of the show, he is identified as former president of the United States, and, you know, up China, all this kind of stuff. But essentially, his head is a jar. We wouldn't want to offend the kids by showing a historical personage. I don't know if these complaints raised Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure were made, that the kiddies who were expected to go to the film had never heard of Joan of Arc or Beethoven or Genghis Khan or Billy the Kid, etc., etc. I don't know. Perhaps they were, but that movie was made about a decade before Futurama started. What really hasn't here is got the wrong end of the stick, that it is just this lack of consciousness that they are on about. The past, that it is just this lack of consciousness that they, like 5 years after they were born, or maybe 5 years before they were born, etc. We get some deep. Somehow select strangers on the basis of the race to be in a restaurant, getting old men and women to up in the street by their race. Careful now, VDH. Or singling out suburbanites by their race for racial taunts and profanity is defined as repertory or overdue payback, on the assumption no one would dare say that the arson, looting, and rhetoric are descending into ever more hate-filled nihilism. Our collective future of nationalized tribalism will become always results when citizens identified by superficial appearance or shared religion, Lebanon, the Balkans, or Iraq, see this in store firsthand. Assuming it gets that bad, and I'm going to make that assumption, nor am I advocate for it. Look at the number. I'm going to make that assumption, nor am I advocate for it. Look at the numbers. Who is still in a substantial majority in America? And when put to shove, the second biggest, or the biggest racial minority in the United States is Hispanics. So when push comes to shove, whose side are they going to be on? Not all of them, but I rather suspect they are going to make a decision which the intersectionalists will not be happy about. Liberal elite whites themselves are now uneasy since the abstract doctrines they so nihilistically advocate, from defunding the police to recalibrating loot distribution, are now becoming reified and closer to home. They see that when BLM protesters to a restaurant to demand fealty or lecture on white privilege or march into a sub to wake up the communism of immorality, the racialists will not qualify their agendas with "except for woke whites." Well, yeah, and this is very amusing, and I must say I'm looking forward to that. Professional sports, once an integral part of American life, appears to be nearly in ruins. Professional baseball, basketball, and football might have survived the virus, the lockdown, and the recession, and then maybe they might not have. After all, millions of the bored, more quickly than expected, got acculturated to the idea of soon not listening to a boring rant from LeBron James or the sad confessional of Drew Brees. But what the NBA and NFL and perhaps Major League Baseball won't survive is cultural suicide as players fragment into causes. The NBA insisted on the billionaires were willing multimillionaires to lose billions as a prestige lark, as a franchise became a sort of huge, showy Louis Vuitton bag. But even billionaires have limits. snobbery and appearing cool do not always trump losing equivalent of a Ferrari every hour, Gulfstream each week. The NBA, we are told, is a woke industry, but it's also the strangest, most non-diverse, right-wing, money-obsessed woke institution in America. More than 3/4 of the multimillionaires African American, where 90% of the billionaire team owners white. Yet the entire industry, players, coaches, owners, staff, lecture Americans ad nauseam about their supposed sins. The monotonous sermons become transparent role to a racist, genocidal, and totalitarian China to recover billions abroad for the billion lost viewership and attendance at home. Well, I think we're looking at scale here. That professional sports simply got too. Remember shocking when Alex Rodriguez, what, $25 million contract? Remember how shocked that was? Well, it's not shocking anymore. Because, Herbert signed that systems continue until they stop. There's all kinds of reasons why systems stop that no one could have predicted. For instance, the COVID-19 hysteria, or America, or the leaders of America deciding that collapse of civic order was just fine because it discomfited Trump. And sports in a very vulnerable position because it was too big. That people are spending too much time on it. They're investing too much of themselves in it. I mean, both in terms of money, frankly, emotional involvement. That's one of those situations where you look in hindsight and you say, well, that wasn't sustainable. But it's a funny thing, life all the time, that right up to the time that things are seen to be unsustainable, are seen as very sustainable, and they will only get bigger and bigger and bigger. You see, there's no poking up because it never works. This is Reuters. McDonald's black franchisee to black franchise owners who accused the fast food giant of racial discrimination by steering them to depressed, crime-ridden neighborhoods and setting them up for failure. Depressed, crime-ridden neighborhoods. Black former franchise owners talking about black neighborhoods? Since McDonald's is black 365, it's been for what? A decade. They have grumbled perhaps more than any other major corporation for Black Lives Matter. In a complaint seeking up to $1 billion in damages, the plaintiff said McDonald's has not offered profitable restaurant locations growth opportunities to black franchisees, the same terms as white franchisees, lying with commitment to diversity and black entrepreneurship. Well, it's my understanding that black people love Mickey D's. Because a McDonald's is in a black neighborhood, why does that mean that it's unsuccessful? Because understanding that black people identify McDonald's far more than white people do. I mean, the burgers, they cost the same everywhere. Do not. Plaintiffs McDonald's sat them under a standard 20-year franchise stores requiring high security and insurance costs. Annual sale 2011 to 2016 were $7,000 below the nationwide norm. Bankruptcy often resulted. It's systematic placement in substandard locations because they're black, the plaintiff Jim Ferraro said in a phone interview. Revenue at McDonald's is governed by one thing only: location. No, he's under his own argument, because it's not simply a question of location, high security and insurance costs. Yeah, it's a question of the behavior of the people who go to the restaurants. So getting paid. Who got paid? Joe Rogan got paid. Again, I don't really understand the whole Joe Rogan experience or how he became a star. Once again, I know him only as the least funny member of the cast of news radio. Nathan Bernard tweets, Joe Rogan's podcast is moving exclusively to Spotify after signing a $100 million deal. His fans are not happy about what episodes are being left behind during the transition. Michael Shermer, really? He's a skeptic, right? Is he really that controversial? Tommy Chung, Alex Jones, Nick Kroll, Michaela Peterson, Owen Benjamin, several times. Sargon of Akkad, Gavin McInnes, Milo Greek name, Gavin McInnes, and Milo Greek name again, Chuck Johnson, Stephen Molyneux, Louis Theroux. I had no idea Louis Theroux was such a controversial character. He's beloved in Britain. Beloved, I tells you. And then a bunch of names that I don't recognize. And what else is that? Oh, yes, Twitter just shut down the most important lawyer in the country at this moment and in our history. Lynn Wood, lawyer for Kyle Rittenhouse and founder of the Fight Back Foundation. Yes. How about that? Of course, it's, nothing to do with politics. It's nothing to do with the Kyle Rittenhouse case having any influence on the November elections. No. Not at all. Not at all. There's a joke on The Simpsons when gambling comes to Springfield that the Reverend Lovejoy says, well, if it's legal, that means it can't be a sin. Is that true? I mean, obviously the context of the joke on The Simpsons was that being legal does not make it moral, not necessarily. But just give you an idea just how far things have advanced in Canada. Prostitution is legal in Canada. It wasn't a vote by legislators. It was the Supreme Court of Canada who argued, and I'm not making this up, that laws against prostitution were discriminatory and unconstitutional because police enforcement of the laws against prostitution exposed prostitutes to danger in the same way that police enforcement of laws against burglary or armed robbery also expose those people to danger. The Supreme Court also legalized physician-assisted murder or euthanasia, medically assisted death. Don Lenihan and Andrew Balfour have a piece in National Newswatch. And Don Lenihan apparently is a very big deal in my country. He's a senior associate at the Institute of Governance. It's one of those things that you've never heard of it, and then you look and, wow, all these people are involved, and it's supported by all these organizations. That's how Canada works. And he's an internationally recognized expert on public engagement, governance, and policy development. Andrew Balfour is managing partner at Rubicon Strategy in Ottawa. He's a PR spiv, and it's almost the rule now that you can't have political opinion unless it comes from a PR spiv. As a candidate for the Conservative leadership, Leslyn Lewis hoped to stop expansion of new categories for medically assisted death. Social conservatives, boo, like Lewis, are angry that party leaders prevent MPs from voting their conscience on a list of issues included assisted dying, abortion, and alphabet people rights. In their minds, whipping these votes is undemocratic and disrespectful. We think this gets things exactly backwards. The real threat to democracy comes from SOCONs who refuse to deal with value conflicts in a democratic way. For example, in a recent letter to the editor on assisted dying, a socially conservative writer states that it is never acceptable to hasten or facilitate the death of a human being, no matter how sick or disabled they might be. Note how confidently the writer presents her views on the subject as an absolute truth. This may impress people who share these views, but misinterprets how values work. Oh, do tell. While facts can be true or false, values are more like a lens that people use to interpret facts. They say something about how the world looks to us, not how it is. Yeah, that's why values are worthless, completely worthless, because they're endlessly mutable. We used to talk about truth. but we no longer do so. Take the debate over mask wearing. While it is a fact that masks reduce the spread of the virus, no, it is not a fact. Values shape how we feel about it, and people with different values are at least partly subjective. That is a conclusion that so-cons boo, or at least they want to reserve the right to declare values they really care about as truths. As history shows, this formula of conflict he talks about the 3 Years' War in the 16th century because that's terribly relevant to bump off old people and feeling good about it. Oh, the principle of tolerance. Oh, yeah. Like, for instance, if you won't march in the gay pride parade, you're finished. Oh, yeah. Like, for instance, if you won't march in the gay pride parade, you're finished in this country. Very tolerant, isn't it? Thanks to in medicine, we now keep people alive much longer than before in all ailments. But it's that is two-edged sword. People watch a spouse wither away from terminal cancer or a loved one whose mind is disintegrating under the onslaught of Alzheimer's. They whole buildings are filled with people who can no longer care for themselves, not even know where or who they are. Oh yeah. So now we get to the heart of it. Culling the weak. You remember it used to be said that hard cases make bad law? Well, in Canada, hard cases are the only cases that make law. Only a few decades ago, most Canadians viewed the sanctity of life much like the letter writer above, but these new experiences have changed how we see death and dying. A recent poll finds that 82% of Canadians believe that people diagnosed with a grievous and irremediable medical condition, including those with dementia, should be allowed to make advance requests for medical assistance in dying. I'd like to see more detail on this. A grievous and irremediable medical condition. Of course, death is a grievous and irremediable medical condition, and we are all condemned to die. As Canadians live through these changes, they are learning them. They talk to one another about the challenge and describe how they felt, how they responded, and how successfully they coped. This learning is slowly being consolidated into a new social narrative, a new ethos that will help organize our shared experiences and redefine our values for the future. In the Carter decision, the Supreme Court took a big step in this direction, recognizing that our right to life, liberty, and security of the person includes the right to ask physicians to kill us. No, that's not what he says. The right to die with dignity and to seek the help of a physician. This ruling was meant to define a new legal framework for lawmakers, but Ottawa's first effort to put it into practice was disconcertingly timid, not enough weak people being culled, and predictably failed a charter challenge in the court. The Trudeau government is now working to fix this and possibly other issues around assisted dying, i.e. not enough people being bumped off by doctors. The court has set a deadline of December 18th. This time around, it is showing a little more courage and looking for more guidance from Canadians. The government launched an online survey, got 300,000 responses. So-cons, boo, are certainly right that parliamentary votes may have an important role to play in this process. Oh, so we are not led by our elected representatives anymore. Oh, this hazy concept of democracy is what's in charge. And guess who gets to decide what democracy is? Why, that would be our friends Dr. Don Lenihan and Andrew Balfour, PR Spiv. Let's see. That the politicians need to, such votes should be viewed as part of a larger public dialogue about Canadians' changing values. They should be guided by a spirit of tolerance and draw on the country's lived experience to help establish new norms and guidelines, whether the issue is assisted dying, abortion, or alphabet people rights. Unfortunately, this is something social conservatives will never accept. It is not enough for them that our democracy guarantees their freedom to live by the more traditional values they espouse. They want more. They want everyone to be bound by their values, and that is a serious affront to democracy. Well, no, that's not how it works. Because if the people who want to further expand physician-assisted murder have a majority in the House of Commons, then they get their way. As has been widely expected, SOCONs played a decisive role in helping Erin O'Toole's win for the Conservative leadership. Now they expect him to give their MPs a strong voice on value issues. That would be bad for the party and bad for democracy. In our view, MPs who show no respect for the principle of tolerance should not have a free vote on such issues, and party leaders have a public duty to keep them on a very short leash. So in arguing for democracy, we have tyranny. But that is the Canadian way. You notice the hypocrisy here, or the Schrodinger's cat way of looking at these so-called values issues. Back when a majority of people supported capital punishment, this is a moral question. It's a moral question. Capital punishment is always wrong. It doesn't matter what people say to pollsters. Oh, okay. Here's a poll. It's from True North. It's Candace Malcolm's organization from June. 76% of Canadians want a total pause on immigration. Total pause. 76% strongly or moderately agree with the statement Canada should temporarily pause immigration until a vaccine is developed for coronavirus and the unemployment rate drops down to pre-coronavirus levels. This is a total pause on including on so-called landed immigrants and temporary foreign workers. 76%. Now, I'm sure if Don Lenihan and Andrew Balfour were apprised of this, they would say that it's racism. And who's going to look after you in your old age? Oh, you mean like those nursing home employees in Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia? That didn't really augur well for the future, did it? Oh, we need these people. There's no jobs for them. And for what, 10, 15 years or longer, all net new jobs in Canada have gone to immigrants. But the fact that 76% of Canadians want a total pause on immigration, it's a moral issue. What about diversity in food? Isn't that really important? Speaking of things that are not popular or no one cares about, there's a story from London's Daily Star, which is obviously false. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry targeted by $250,000 paparazzi shot in Santa Barbara. Now, there's a still here from Megan Mertz's risible interview with Gloria Steinem, who is still alive. There are tons of pictures of Megan Mertz and her hapless husband around. But this was obviously leaked by Megan Mertz herself or one of her few remaining friends, that, oh, people are terribly interested in Megan Mertz and Prince what's-his-name. Imagine that, $250,000 for a picture. Nah, I don't think so. Well, here's a picture from the Press Association of their risibly named child, Archie. And here's another picture from the Press Association. And yet another picture. There's no shortage of pictures of Megan Mertz. But no, we're just going to lie to us that we just can't get enough Megan Mertz related news. They do their little charity things and they spend their 10 or 15 minutes looking exceedingly awkward. Here's a question for you. People have complained about the quality of the video on my live stream, that the Prince and Megan Mertz are living in a $15 million home. How is it that the video quality of their live streams is worse than mine? How is that possible? How is that? Are they that mean that they can't spend I don't know, like just say, look at Stefan Molyneux's video quality. Pretty great. I'm sure he didn't have to pay all that much money for it. From the Toronto Star, what Canada needs now is more panic. It needs more panic, much more panic. Is Ontario nearing the much dreaded second wave? Four charts to sum up COVID-19 in August, plus what we can learn from cities around the world. And this is from Kenyon Wallace, investigative reporter, and Patty Winsa, data reporter. Now, okay, so let's make this even more panicky. let's have a picture of people eating together. 4 people sitting at a table, and then 2 people sitting at a table. And the clear implication is that the reopening of restaurants, if only patio service, is it's fueling the disease. It's fueling the second wave. Go second wave. Okay. Ontario spent the first 2 weeks of August eliminating active cases, and the last half of the month gaining a good portion of the back, according to analysis of provincial COVID-19 data by the Star's Andrew Bailey. There are 1,221 active cases of the virus in the province, up from a low of 891 on August the 12th. 1,221 active cases. I suppose in a village of 10,000, that would be pretty serious. How many people does Ontario have? 14.7 million people. That's how many it has. We got to wear masks everywhere because, right-winger Doug Ford insists. Let's see. Epidemiologist Zaid Butt, an assistant professor at the School of Public Health and Health Systems at the University of Waterloo, says most of the businesses are open. People are going out. Definitely, you'll see a surge of new cases when you reopen. I think the question here is whether we think this is a second wave or this is just because of the reopening. It will be weeks before we know the answer. Butt says that in a second wave, he would expect to see a sustained increase in cases over time. And at this point, it's too early to call. Let's do the old Control F pick. Oh, the word deaths. Yes, in all the countries, the new cases are in the younger demographic, and they don't seem to be yet triggering increases in deaths or bleed over into the older demographic, says Raywat Diondanen, associate professor and epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa. So, yeah, people aren't being hospitalized, people aren't dying. What is the problem? The story goes on to say, yes, this is the best part. The data indicates that we are not seeing COVID-19 transmission where people are wearing masks, and there have been no known outbreaks directly linked to bars, restaurants, gym facilities, or other businesses where people gather. How about this where people gather? How about that? Then why did you run with that picture of people eating, sitting together closely and eating? They're not wearing masks, by the way. I guess the Toronto Star had this story that lockdown is ending, as it should have a long time ago. It should never have been instituted. So more people are out and about. Case numbers are going up. Is that a catastrophe? No, because the vast majority of these new cases, they're not being hospitalized. Last time I checked in British Columbia, there's something like 20 people in the whole of the province that are hospitalized for COVID-19. But let's talk about a second wave, a much dreaded second wave, and let's run a deliberately misleading picture which gives people the impression that these people who are eating together out on patios outside of restaurants are murderers. Yeah. Let's see. Philadelphia mayor tweets apology after banning indoor dining in his own city and being photographed eating inside a Maryland restaurant. Yes, social distancing for thee, but not for me. Bill de Blasio, suggests indoor dining won't return to New York City until there's a COVID-19 vaccine, despite New Jersey allowing diners inside this week. As it is revealed, he's laying off 22,000 city workers. Yeah, you work for a restaurant, you're screwed. You work for the city, we are going to fight to the death for you. How is he still in power here, this clown? Okay, I already talked about the escape to the country. And, there's an anti-Fauci at the White House, a task force on COVID-19. His name is Scott Atlas, and he is a radiologist, a senior fellow at the conservative Hoover Institution of Stanford University, and a frequent Fox News commentator. He previously served as chief of neuroradiology at Stanford University Medical Center, and he is in favor of herd immunity. And the Daily Mail helpfully explains the idea which Sweden has adopted is that there should be no widespread lockdown, but vulnerable populations should be strongly protected. A herd immunity strategy allows many people to get sick and therefore generate immunity to the disease, eventually preventing the spread to the shielded, vulnerable population. Get sick, I think what they mean is get infected, because as we are finding out, after the disease has already killed all of the very old people that it was going to, well, that's not necessarily true, of course, because the vulnerable, most vulnerable, were not protected. But the low-hanging fruit is always plucked first by viruses, and we're not going to see much more of that. And it turns out that you have COVID-19 and you are young and you are in decent health, not a threat. It is not a threat. In fact, many parts of America may have reached herd immunity already. Alex Barron writes, I don't know who in the White House decided to talk openly about herd immunity, but the decision is genius. For too long, herd immunity has been the strategy that dare not speak its name. The media hysterics have forced it off the table. And the governor of Florida has said there is never going to be another lockdown, that this was a terrible mistake. And you might remember the media was gleefully, and I mean gleefully, predicting bodies stacked up like cordwood in Georgia and Florida, and it did not happen. Did they apologize? Did they adjust their views? No, they did not. And I guess they're going to get away with it. Berenson writes, remember what we've done to our country, how we've put more than 10 million Americans, probably close to 20 million, out of work. Remember the choices we've made and why we made them. Demand answers, demand accountability. Attention must be paid. He tweeted that on April the 6th, 7 hours ago. He tweeted 5 months later, 5 months. And even as the floodgates begin to break, the people who forced this to us still won't admit the truth that everything they recommended was wrong, much less change it. Revolver exclusive study, COVID-19 lockdowns over 10 times more deadly than the pandemic itself. And up until this point, there had been no simple, rigorous analysis that accurately and definitively conveys the true costs of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Accordingly, Revolver News set out to commission a study to do precisely that, to finally quantify the net damage of the lockdowns in terms of a metric known as life years. Simply put, we have drawn upon existing economic studies on the health effects of unemployment to calculate an estimate of how many years of life will have been lost due to lockdowns in the United States, and have weighed this against an estimate of how many years of life will have been saved by the lockdowns. The results are nothing short of staggering and suggest that the lockdowns will end up costing Americans over 10 times as many years of life than they will save from the virus itself. That's at revolver.news. And the last story I want to talk about is again from Canada, that the Toronto Star, which is Canada's best-selling newspaper and its most influential, is now running death threats disguised as op-eds from Royce and James on last Friday. And how is he described? Oh, he's a former Star reporter and freelance contributing columnist based in Toronto. He's a race hustler. It's that simple. Disrespected, disenfranchised, diminished, and dehumanized Black people will one day run out of patience, and then we will run out of time. Yeah, the fire next time. We've been hearing that ever since James Baldwin back in the 1960s, but apparently not enough people have been murdered and maimed already. Got to get rid of all of the bad cops, root them out, leaf and branch. Failing that, someday, after I'm gone for sure, this powder keg that's accumulated from police use of disproportionate force against Black people will blow up in our faces, literally, in one bloody conflagration after another. I can't vision an alternative future, but you are free to spin a peaceful scenario when Black people don't have to ask plaintively, am I not a man? or feel compelled to state the obvious, Black lives matter, and not be insulted with, but all lives matter. Violent opposition to the conditions of living while Black, that phrase is in all caps. Well, the first letters are, is not my wish, it's my unimaginable fear. Sounds like you're enjoying it there, fella. Disrespected, yeah, we had the alliteration before. Oppression has a way of birthing breakaway guerrillas, possibly formed from a broken down subset or cohort of demographic with nothing to lose except greater grievances than the aggrieved. Yeah, why don't you hold that up to a mirror? Consider the other demographics in Toronto and Canada and what they might be thinking. Sam Mitchell, former coach of the Toronto Raptors, is reported saying, as a Black man, 56 years old, every Black person I know knows someone who's been shot and killed by police. I don't believe. 56 years old, every Black person I know knows someone who's been shot and killed by police. I don't believe you. And the America, Kenosha, Los Angeles Clippers, Doc Rivers, this is all happening in the United States, not in Canada. Someone named Masai Ujiri had some difficulty entering a basketball court to celebrate the Toronto Raptors championship in June 2019. Yeah, that's, pretty shocking. Obviously, the fire next time. So when your Black neighbors and Black entertainers and sports heroes hang their heads in exhaustion, wow, they're pretty active for being exhausted, wouldn't you say? It suggests that they're not exhausted, quite the opposite. With scourge of police brutality and anti-Black racism, it's because they are losing hope. They're clearly not losing hope, because people who have lost hope are not activists. Everyone in social science who knows anything about social science knows this. That's the sadness associated with the NBA Wildcat strike this past week. The professional basketball players, rich, accomplished, elite young men, have already lost hope of seeing change anytime soon. They can rattle off a litany of their own experiences once they take off their sports hero uniform away from the arena when they are just another Black body. This is essentially, it's a death threat. It's a death threat against white people. It's published by the Toronto Star, and apparently, I don't think they think there was anything controversial about this. Many years hence, when I'm a distant memory, my fear is gone with me. The children will not just mouth LeBron James tweeted words this week. Fuck this man. We demand change. Sick of it. They'll mean it. Well, it seems to me that killing people on the streets, beating people up on the streets, graffitiing everything in sight, setting things on fire, smashing through walls, widespread looting, sounds like they mean it already. But I guess white people have not got the message yet to hurry up and die. A final look at the chat here. MCT, what gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. KMG, thank you so much. Well, thank you. British American, blue and green should always be seen together. Halper says, Kevin's planted axiom concept is great for reading the news. Thank you, appreciate it. Like the blue jacket, green tie look. Yeah, I guess the shirt is green too. Yeah, it's a nice combo. You should give a sarcastic boo when you say herd immunity. Yeah, said Emmett Kelly's Earth. Yeah, I'll consider it. He said previously, public officials want to keep up the scare, as Nathan Bedford Forrest used to say. I'm a hardcore dinosaur. Yeah, all right, okay. Neo-Nazi? No. We don't want that. Mertz never birthed that child. That is my view, actually. That the risibly named Prince Archie is not the natural child of Meghan Mertz and may not be the natural child of Prince Harry. All of the mystification surrounding that birth was much greater than that of the birth of the heir to James II, which was one of the excuses given for his overthrow after a civil war, when the Dutch sodomite and usurper William of Orange, that a baby was produced in a warming pan. Well, Meghan Markle's child was born when? Where? We don't really know. Why the secrecy? Why was there not a statement signed by royal physicians? If someone's in line to the throne, you want to know these things. You want to be sure that the birth is legitimate in every way, and it wasn't. Her constant signifying with her hand on her belly, and this isn't the first case that we have seen of a faked pregnancy. I know that Beyonce was terribly embarrassed when her phony womb moved inward on her on one occasion. But Prince Harry gave the game away when he announced the child is 2 weeks old when it was supposed to have been 2 days old. I suspect that a child was secured from someone for some considerations, but it would appear that the negotiations were protracted and it did not all come together until the last minute. Halper says, I've never heard the term PR spiv anywhere else. I suspect Kevin made it up. No, I did not. And it's Simon Heffer, the political columnist and author of The Standard, an excellent biography of Enoch Powell, like the Roman. He came up with the term. British American says immigration rates throughout the Anglosphere should be 0. I would suggest that they should be negative, actually. Emmett Kelly's Earth, have you thought of testing another platform, e.g. DLive, and see if you have these connection issues? I have, but I've been constantly on the move. And we'll see. Your mama says Rogan's problem is that he just tends to agree with his guest and that he's stoned to the gills. A lot of auto-tune effects in this stream, says Lemmy Hirsch. I don't know. Leponius Maximus likes the suit. Actually, it's just a suit jacket. I'm wearing a pair of chinos. So that's the show for tonight. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, as per usual. Thank you all for tuning in. What's coming up on Theater Thursday is Come and See from 1985, directed by Elim Klimov. And on the book club, sort of polar opposite in terms of heaviness versus lightness, The Once and Future King by T.H. White, which is a really delightful book, which is the Arthurian legend, but in terms of time, in terms of technology, it is all over the place, and deliberately so. If you'd like to contribute to this live stream, and contributions are always very welcome, particularly now, especially as I'm in flux. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money directly through Interac to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilization collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge some kind of genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.